He was about to walk away from the best thing that ever happened to him. All because she showed up covered in mud and 30 minutes late. But here's the truth nobody tells you. Sometimes the person who changes your entire life shows up looking like an absolute disaster. And if David had left that coffee shop when every instinct told him to, he would have missed discovering what it really means to be rich. This is the story of a man who had everything money could buy, but owned nothing that actually mattered. Until one soaking wet woman holding a kitten taught him the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Stay with me, because this story will change how you see success forever. Welcome to Tales of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you are watching from. Let me tell you a story about a man named David. David Thompson owned a successful tech consulting company in Seattle. On paper, his life looked perfect. He had a penthouse apartment overlooking Puget Sound, drove a luxury car, and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But here's the thing about perfection. Sometimes it's just really expensive loneliness. David's days were all the same. Wake up, check the stock market, meetings with clients who only cared about numbers, more meetings about those numbers, then home to an empty apartment. His friends, if you could call them that, were other business owners who talked about profit margins over expensive whiskey. His family barely called anymore. They'd learned years ago that David was always too busy, always had another call to take, another deal to close. This particular Saturday afternoon, David sat in a corner booth at the Harborview Coffee House, a quiet little spot near the waterfront. The place had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Elliott Bay, where sailboats drifted past like lazy clouds. He'd ordered black coffee, expensive and imported, though he couldn't really taste the difference anymore. His younger brother had set this up. A blind date. "David, you need to meet someone real," his brother had said. "Her name is Sophie. She works with kids at a community center. Just give it a chance, okay?" Just one afternoon, David had almost said no. He'd been on dates before, plenty of them. Women who Googled him before they met him, who already knew about his company and his net worth. Women who laughed too loud at his jokes and touched his arm too often. Women who were auditioning to be Mrs. Thompson, CEO's wife, not really trying to know David the person. But his brother had looked at him with those worried eyes, the same look their mom used to give him before she passed. So David had agreed. One afternoon. He could spare that. It was 3:30 now. She was supposed to be here at 3 o'clock. David checked his watch again, that expensive Swiss timepiece that told him he was wasting valuable time. He should leave. Clearly, she wasn't coming. Or maybe she'd looked him up, seen his success, and gotten intimidated. It happened. He was reaching for his jacket when he saw her through the window. A young woman was running down the sidewalk toward the coffee shop, and I mean really running. She had something clutched against her chest, wrapped in what looked like a jacket. Her jeans were soaked from the knees down, dripping water with every step. Her hair, dark and wavy, had come loose from whatever had been holding it back and flew wild around her face. She burst through the coffee shop door, breathless and dripping, and looked around frantically until her eyes landed on him. David knew it was her. Somehow, he just knew. "I'm Sophie," she gasped, hurrying over to his table. "And before you leave, which I can see you're about to do, please just let me explain." David stood there, frozen between sitting back down and walking out. The entire coffee shop had turned to stare at this soaking wet woman who'd just blown in like a storm. Sophie carefully adjusted whatever she was holding, and that's when David saw it. A tiny kitten, barely bigger than her hand, wrapped in her denim jacket. Its fur was matted and wet, its eyes barely open. "I was walking here," Sophie said, words tumbling out fast and urgent, "and I heard crying from the storm drain near Pike Place Market. This little one had fallen through the grate." She looked down at the kitten with such tenderness it made something ache in David's chest. Everyone was just walking past. So many people, and everyone just kept walking. So I asked a shop owner for help getting the grate open, and I climbed down there. She looked back up at David, her eyes brown and fierce and completely unapologetic. "The water was deeper than I thought. And cold. But I couldn't leave her down there. I just couldn't. I got her out and ran to the emergency vet clinic 6 blocks from here. They're keeping her warm and checking her over, but I couldn't leave until I knew she'd be okay. That's why I'm late. Sophie stood there, dripping water onto the hardwood floor, holding her muddy shoes in one hand because apparently she'd kicked them off at some point during her rescue mission. She looked like an absolute disaster. Her shirt clung to her, soaked through. She had a scrape on her elbow that was bleeding a little. Mascara, if she'd been wearing any, had run down her cheeks. David realized everyone in the coffee shop was still staring. The barista had stopped mid-pour. An elderly couple in the corner had their mouths slightly open. "Please sit down," David heard himself say.
"What? Sit down. Please."
Sophie looked surprised, like she'd been bracing for him to walk away and hadn't prepared for this response. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, trying not to spread more water around, though it was really too late for that. The barista approached, clearly unsure how to handle a customer who looked like she'd gone swimming in the bay. David caught her eye and said firmly, "The lady will have whatever she'd like. And please bring some towels and a first aid kit. That scrape needs cleaning." The barista nodded and hurried away. Sophie was staring at him now, really looking at him, like she was trying to figure out if he was real or if she'd hit her head during the rescue. "You don't have to stay," Sophie said quietly. "I know I look terrible. Your brother probably told you I'm nothing special. Just someone who works with kids and makes barely enough to pay rent. I'm sure this isn't what you expected." "My brother talks too much," David said. "Tell me about the kitten." And just like that, something shifted. You could feel it in the air, like when the weather changes and you can smell rain coming. Sophie's whole face transformed when she started talking about that kitten. "She was so scared," Sophie said, her voice softening, shaking and crying in this tiny, terrified voice. "When I finally got down there, the water was almost up to my knees, and it was so cold it took my breath away. But she was clinging to this little ledge, trying so hard not to slip under." "What did you do?" David asked, and he realized he actually wanted to know. Not polite conversation wanting to know, genuinely wanting to know. "I talked to her the whole time," Sophie said. "Just kept telling her I was coming, that she was going to be okay. When I finally reached her, she was so tiny and fragile in my hands." She looked up at David, and there was this light in her eyes. "I wrapped her in my jacket and held her close to keep her warm. She cried the whole way to the vet, but she also started purring. Can you believe that? In the middle of being terrified and cold, she still purred." The barista returned with towels and a first aid kit.
"Ass."
Also started purring. Can you believe that? In the middle of being terrified and cold, she still purred. The barista returned with towels and a first aid kit. Sophie cleaned herself up as best she could, but there wasn't much to be done about the soaked clothes. David watched her carefully clean the scrape on her elbow, wincing but not complaining. "So you work with kids?" David asked. Sophie nodded, drying her hair with a towel. "I'm a counselor at the Rainier Community Center. We run after-school programs for kids in the neighborhood. Homework help, art classes, sports, music lessons. A lot of these kids, their parents work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. The center is a safe place for them to be while their parents are working." "That sounds important," David said. "It is," Sophie replied simply. "It doesn't pay much, but it matters. These kids matter. Yesterday, I had a 10-year-old girl tell me she wants to be a marine biologist. 6 months ago, she was failing science and thought she was stupid. But we worked together, and now she checks out books about the ocean and tells me facts about dolphins. That's worth more than any paycheck could ever be." David thought about his own work.
Tech consulting.
Helping companies streamline their operations, maximize efficiency, increase profit margins. When was the last time his work had made someone's eyes light up the way Sophie's did when she talked about that little girl? "What about you?"
Sophie asked.
"Your brother mentioned you run a company?" "Tech consulting," David said, and even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. "We help businesses optimize their technology infrastructure." "Do you enjoy it?" The question caught him off guard. People asked if his business was successful, if it was growing, if he was expanding. No one ever asked if he enjoyed it. "I'm good at it," David said carefully. "That's not what I asked," Sophie pointed out gently. Being good at something and enjoying it aren't always the same thing. No, David admitted. I suppose they're not. They talked as the afternoon light shifted, turning the water in the bay from blue to gold. Other customers came and went, shooting curious glances at the still damp Sophie, but David barely noticed. He was too busy listening to her talk about her work, her life, the way she saw the world. Sophie told him about growing up in a small town in Oregon, the middle child in a family of 5 kids. Her dad had been a teacher, her mom a nurse. We never had much money, Sophie said, but we had everything that mattered. Family dinners every night, even if it was just spaghetti. Parents who showed up to every school play and soccer game. A house full of noise and laughter and love. David told her about his childhood, and he was surprised by how much he shared. Growing up in a big house that always felt empty. Parents who showed love by writing checks for boarding school, for summer camps, for anything that kept him busy and out of their way. Building his company because he was good with technology and numbers, because success was measurable and feelings weren't. When did you last do something just because it made you happy?
Sophie asked.
Not because it was profitable or productive, but just because it brought you joy.
David thought about it. Really thought about it.
I can't remember, he finally said. That's sad, Sophie said, and there was no judgment to her voice, just genuine sadness for him. It is, David agreed. I'd forgotten that was even an option. As the sun started to set, painting the sky pink and orange, David walked Sophie toward the bus stop. She'd refused his offer to call her a car, saying the bus was fine and she wasn't made of sugar, she wouldn't melt. Can I see you again? David asked as they reached the stop. Sophie smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Even after I showed up looking like a drowned rat? Especially after that, David said. You're the first real person I've talked to in years. And I mean really talked to, not just business small talk. Real people are messy, Sophie warned. We show up late because we're rescuing kittens. We don't always say the right thing. We cry at sad movies and laugh too loud at bad jokes. I'm starting to think that's exactly what I need, David said. Their second date was nothing like David had ever experienced. No fancy restaurant, no expensive wine. Sophie took him to the community center where she worked on a Saturday morning when they were running a special program. Wear something you don't mind getting messy, she told him on the phone. So David showed up in jeans and an old t-shirt, probably the most casual he dressed in 5 years. Sophie met him at the door, wearing paint-splattered overalls and a bright smile. Ready to work? She asked. The center was alive with noise and color. Kids everywhere, ranging from about 6 to 16 years old. Some were painting a mural on one wall. Others were in the gym playing basketball. A group sat in a corner with instruments, making sounds that were enthusiastic if not exactly musical. This is David, Sophie announced to a group of kids who were setting up for an art class. He's going to help us today. For the next 4 hours, David painted alongside 10-year-olds who told him exactly what he was doing wrong and how to fix it. He helped a shy 8-year-old boy mix colors until they got the perfect shade of blue for the ocean they were painting. He listened to a teenage girl talk about her dreams of going to art school, even though her family thought it was impractical. You're good with them, Sophie observed during a break, watching David crouch down to help a little girl who'd spilled paint on her hands. They're easy to be good with, David said. They just want someone to pay attention, to take them seriously. That's all anyone wants, really, Sophie said quietly. As they cleaned up that evening, David realized something had shifted inside him. All week, he'd been thinking about Sophie. Not about quarterly reports or client meetings, but about her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, how she talked about the kids at the center like they were the most important people in the world. Sophie, David said as they walked out together, the sun setting behind the Seattle skyline, can I ask you something?
Sure.
What would you do if you had unlimited resources? If money was no object, what would you change? Sophie stopped walking and looked at him seriously.
That's easy, she said.
I'd expand the center. We have to turn kids away every session because we don't have enough space or enough staff. I'd make sure every child who needed a safe place had one. I'd pay the counselors what they're actually worth so we could keep the best people. I'd add more programs, music, art, science, coding, whatever these kids are passionate about. She looked out at the city, her expression wistful. I'd create scholarship funds for the kids who dream of college, but don't think they can afford it. I'd make sure no kid went hungry, so we'd have a proper kitchen and serve meals. I'd build a library where they could read and dream and imagine different futures for themselves. Her voice had grown stronger as she talked, filled with passion and purpose. But then she sighed. But money is definitely an object, so we do what we can with what we
Have.
And what we have is love and dedication and the absolute certainty that these kids deserve every chance we can give them. David felt something click into place, like a puzzle piece he hadn't known was missing. Over the next few weeks, David started changing his life. He began leaving the office at reasonable hours to volunteer at the center. He cut back on client meetings to spend Tuesday evenings helping kids with math homework. He discovered he was actually pretty good at explaining algebra when the student was a determined 13-year-old who wanted to be an engineer. But more than that, he started changing his business. "I want to talk to you about something," David said to Sophie one evening as they sat by the water, watching ferries cross the bay. "Okay," Sophie said, sounding slightly nervous. "What would you say if I told you I wanted to redirect a significant portion of my company's resources toward community programs? Fund after-school centers, scholarship programs, technology access for underserved schools?" Sophie turned to look at him. "You're serious?" "I've spent 10 years making money for people who already have money," David said. "Helping rich companies get richer. And I'm good at it, but you were right to ask if I enjoy it. I don't. It doesn't mean anything."
He took her hand.
"But watching you work with those kids, seeing how much impact the center has with so little funding, it made me realize something. I have resources. Real resources. And I could actually do something that matters with them." "David, that's incredible," Sophie said, her eyes shining. "But you don't need my permission or approval." "No, but I need your guidance," David said. "I need someone who knows what communities actually need, not what some wealthy consultant thinks they need. I need someone who sees people, not profit margins." Sophie squeezed his hand. "You're not who I expected," she said softly. "Neither are you," David replied. "When you showed up soaking wet, holding that kitten, I almost left. I almost walked away, because you didn't fit into my narrow idea of what my life should look like.
And now?
Now I can't imagine my life without you in it," David said simply. 6 months into their relationship, David's life looked completely different, and he'd never been happier. His company had restructured. He still ran the tech consulting business, but now a significant portion of the profits went into a foundation he'd created. The Thompson Foundation for Community Development. Sophie had laughed when he'd told her the name. "Not very creative," she'd teased. "I'm a tech guy, not a marketing guru," he'd responded, smiling. The foundation funded after-school programs across Seattle. They'd already expanded Sophie's community center, adding a new wing with a computer lab and a proper kitchen. They'd hired 3 more counselors and a part-time music teacher. Enrollment had doubled. But David's favorite part was the scholarship program. They'd already given out 15 full-ride scholarships to kids from the center who were heading to college. Kids who'd never thought college was possible were now planning their futures. David's old friends thought he'd lost his mind. "You're giving away millions," one of them said over drinks one evening. "Don't you want to grow your wealth? Build something bigger?" "I am building something bigger," David had replied. "I'm just measuring success differently now." They didn't understand, and David realized he didn't need them to. He'd found a new community. The parents at the center who thanked him with tears in their eyes, the kids who showed him their report cards with pride, the other volunteers who gave their time and energy because they believed in the work. David's father, a retired executive who'd built his own fortune in real estate, was even less understanding. "You're throwing your money away on charity cases," his father said during a tense phone call. "These people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, not wait for handouts." "They're not charity cases, Dad," David said, trying to keep his voice calm. "They're kids who deserve the same chances we had. Better chances, actually, because unlike us, they're learning that success isn't just about money." His father had hung up on him. They hadn't spoken since. It hurt, but Sophie was there to remind him of what mattered. You're breaking a cycle, she told him one night as they lay on her couch, watching rain streak down the windows. Your parents showed love through money instead of presents. You're choosing differently. That takes courage. One evening, David took Sophie back to the Harborview Coffee House. Same corner booth, same view of the water. Are we recreating our disaster? Sophie asked, laughing. Actually, David said, I'm trying to fix a mistake. What mistake? When I first saw you running toward this place, soaking wet and holding that kitten, my instinct was to run. To walk away from someone who didn't fit into my carefully controlled life. He reached across the table and took both her hands in his. But you taught me that the best things in life are uncontrolled and unpredictable. That real love, real purpose, real joy, they're all messy and complicated and absolutely worth it. David pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. His hands were shaking slightly. I'm not good at romantic speeches, he admitted. But I know this. You make me want to be better. Not richer or more successful by my father's standards, but actually better as a person.
Kinder.
More present. More real. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Marry me, Sophie. Let me spend the rest of my life learning to see the world the way you do. Let me be part of your mission to make things better, one kid, one kitten, one moment of kindness at a time. Sophie laughed through her tears. You know I'm always going to be bringing home strays, right? Last week, it was a kitten. Next week, it might be a kid who needs a place to stay or an elderly neighbor who needs help. I'm counting on it, David said. That's who you are. That's why I love you. Yes, Sophie said, tears streaming down her face now. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married 4 months later, not in some fancy hotel ballroom, but in the community center gym, decorated by the kids with handmade paper flowers and streamers. Sophie wore a simple white dress. David wore a suit but took off his tie halfway through the reception because a 7-year-old told him he looked too fancy for dancing. Their first dance was interrupted 3 times by kids wanting to join in, and it was perfect. David's father didn't come to the wedding. His brother did, though, and cried through the entire ceremony. Your mom would be so proud of you, he whispered to David afterward. David thought about his mother, who died when he was 20, before he'd built his company, before he'd forgotten how to feel. She'd been a teacher before she married his father, had given it up to be a society wife, and he thought she'd always regretted it. Yeah, David said. I think she would be. 1 year after their wedding, David sat on the back porch of their house, watching the sun set over the small piece of land they'd bought outside the city. Not a mansion, though he could have afforded one. Just a comfortable, warm house with enough room for the life they were building. They'd turned half the property into something Sophie called a sanctuary. It wasn't official or anything fancy, just a place where they fostered animals that needed temporary homes. Right now, they had 3 dogs, 2 cats, a rabbit with 3 legs, and a parrot that Sophie had rescued from a neglectful situation. The other half of the property was set up for kids from the center. They'd built a garden where kids could learn to grow vegetables, a small art studio in the barn, and a fire pit where they hosted weekend campouts for kids who'd never left the city. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dirt on her jeans from working in the garden. She had a smudge of paint on her cheek and a smile on her face. Come look, she called. The tomatoes are finally ripening. The kids are going to be so excited. David followed her to the garden, where rows of plants grew in neat lines. They'd planted them with a group of kids in the spring, teaching them about seeds and soil and patience. Remember when Marcus planted his seeds upside down? Sophie laughed. He was so convinced that's how you do it, and when I corrected him, he said I was wrong and checked YouTube to prove it. Then he came back the next week and replanted them the right way without saying a word. David smiled. He's going to be a scientist someday. He's got that perfect combination of confidence and willingness to admit when he's wrong. They worked in the garden until the light faded, then sat on the back steps, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. A rescue dog they'd named Chance dozed at their feet. From inside the house, they could hear the parrot singing off-key. Do you ever miss it? Sophie asked quietly. The old life, the luxury, the simplicity of just focusing on making money? David thought about it honestly. Sometimes I miss the simplicity, he admitted. Running a foundation is complicated. There are always more needs than we can meet, always another kid who needs help, always another problem to solve. He took Sophie's hand. But no, I don't miss the old life. That life was comfortable but empty. Like living in a beautiful house with no furniture. It looked good from the outside, but there was nothing inside.
And now?
Now it's messy and chaotic and exhausting, David said. We have 3 dogs that need walking at 6 in the morning. We have kids showing up at all hours with problems they need help solving. We have a parrot that screams curse words it learned from its previous owner. Our dinner conversations are about fundraising strategies and whether we should expand the computer lab or add more art supplies first. He pulled Sophie closer. And I've never been happier. Never felt more alive, more useful, more like I'm actually making a difference in the world. Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder.
I was so scared that day, she confessed.
After I rescued the kitten, I almost didn't come to the coffee shop at all. I thought you'd take one look at me and leave. And honestly, I wouldn't have blamed you. I almost did leave, David admitted. That's the scary part. I almost missed everything we have now because I was too focused on appearances, on what I thought my life should look like. What stopped you? Your eyes, David said. The way you looked at me and refused to apologize for doing the right thing. Like you knew your worth had nothing to do with how you looked or what you owned. That confidence, that certainty about what matters. That's what stopped me from walking away. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the dogs shifting and sighing in their sleep, the distant sound of traffic from the highway. You know what I realized? David said. People spend their whole lives chasing the wrong things. Money, status, the perfect image. They think those things will make them happy, make them feel successful, make them feel like they matter. But real wealth is this, he continued, gesturing to their modest house, the garden, the animals sleeping peacefully around them. It's sitting on a back porch with someone you love, knowing you're building something that actually matters. It's watching kids discover they're capable of more than they thought possible. It's going to bed exhausted but satisfied because you spent your day making the world a tiny bit better, even when it's covered in mud and dirt and paint. Sophie asked, smiling. Especially then, David said. That's how you know it's real. Real life is messy. Real love is complicated. Real purpose doesn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet or a business plan. He kissed the top of her head.
You taught me that.
You taught me that the best things in life can't be scheduled or controlled or bought. They can only be embraced, mess and all. Inside the house, the parrot let out another off-key screech. Chance the dog started howling in response. From the barn, one of the other dogs joined in. It was chaos, pure and simple.
Should we do something about that?
Sophie asked, though she made no move to get up. Probably, David said, also not moving. In a minute. They sat there on the porch, holding each other, surrounded by the beautiful mess of the life they'd built together. And David Thompson, who'd once measured his worth in profit margins and stock portfolios, understood finally what it meant to be truly wealthy. It meant having someone who showed up soaking wet and unapologetic, teaching him that the most valuable things in life can't be cleaned up or controlled or purchased. They can only be embraced, exactly as they are, messy, unexpected, and absolutely perfect. If this story reminded you that true value isn't about appearances or bank accounts, but about the lives we touch and the love we share, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding what really matters. Leave a comment telling us about a time you discovered that being rich and being wealthy are two completely different things. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.